you whether that property is in a flood zone or not. That's huge. Because you don't want to waste your time showing a property to a customer who does not want property in a flood zone. Nor do you want to list a property that's in a flood zone and the client does not have flood insurance. Because let's give this scenario. Let's say you're showing 223 Dog Street Wool Market. Okay? We run that zone determination for him. It comes back in a flood zone. One of the first questions you need to ask the person that owns that house, do you currently have flood insurance? And if they don't, then we need an elevation certificate. We need to find out at that point how far above or below the base flood elevation that property is to see if it's affordable. This will make a huge difference whether you're showing properties that's sellable versus not sellable. Y'all all have listed properties in the past, I'm sure, that when you listed it, you knew this is going to be a hard sell. This is really going to be a hard property to sell. Versus property that you've listed and think, man, this is going to jump off the pages. So knowing whether it's in a flood zone or not is huge. And it takes me no time to do it. Okay? That's the first thing. How many of y'all are familiar with the term pre-firm?
Pre-firm?
Okay. Pre-firm. Pre-firm.
Firm?
Pre-firm. Let me tell you, let me give you Ernie's definition of pre-firm and how it works. Parts of the Mississippi Gulf Coast got involved in the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, at different times, okay? I want to say Gulfport got involved in either 1972 or 1974. I'm not sure when, but it's sometime during that time frame. So what happens is property like my house was built in 1952. So my house, if it was in a flood insurance, a floodplain, would have been eligible for what is called pre-firm, okay? That means I don't necessarily have to have an elevation certificate. My rate is going to be pretty standard as we go along. Now, if you look at the National Flood Insurance Program this morning, you will find right now NFIP and FEMA says they are in the hole, depending upon which article you read, anywhere from $24 billion all the way up to $28 billion, just depending upon who you're reading it by. And folks are beginning to panic about that. Now, I'm really unsure as to why NFIP and FEMA has to be a program that the federal government says, of all the programs we have that are in the hole, this one's got to be solvent. But nonetheless, that's where they have. And if you recall, the Biggert Waters Act of 2012 came in and did some things that freaked all of us out, because it was an immediate change and an immediate cost on properties that really was significant, if y'all remember that. You remember we all panicked on that. So they made some changes, but as of April 1st, they're beginning to make some more changes. Okay?
Okay, but we still didn't get the whole pre-firm definition back.
Okay. Well, pre-firm, I'm sorry, did I not say? No. Pre-firm is property that was built prior to the community being involved in the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay?
So those do not have to meet the current federal elevation guidelines?
It's changing. All right? So what happened was, they have decided that pre-firm properties are going to have 1 year at the rate they're charged now, and then after that they're going to start raising those rates until the property gets to the actuarial price.
Like everybody else is doing now.
Right. Now how does that affect you?
So you're talking about grandfather
No.
and insurance?
No. Hold on to the grandfather, okay? Promise me you'll hold on to that question, because when I look at you and ask you, what was that you said? That's what I want you to remind me of, okay? Because I don't want to leave that out. So what they're doing is, what would happen is, if you go and you look at a property and it was built prior to that community being involved in the National Flood Insurance Program, and it was in a flood zone, you can actually write it at a better rate. Here's the problem though. You need to get an elevation certificate. on that property and let us run the quote on it. Because where you are now ain't gonna be where you're gonna be 5 years from now. And your client needs to know that. Your client needs to know that this is gonna go up every year until it reaches this point. And that's significant, and it's also very painful. It's a conversation you don't wanna have. It's a conversation I don't wanna have. But the conversation I really don't wanna have is 3 years from now when they look at me and say, why didn't you tell me this was going to go up to this point? And they're in a property that they can no longer afford. Does that make sense?
If a home is in an AE flood zone, it is in a flood zone.
Yes.
AE isn't good, it's bad, it's a flood zone.
It's a flood zone, but there are different values of AE, okay?
Okay, and that's where the elevation comes into play?
That's where the elevation comes in. I'll have people call me all the time and say, Ernie, can you give me an estimate on this house? Yes, I can. Somewhere between 400 and 4,000. That's the best estimate I can give you. Because I can't begin, and any agent that will tell you and give you a price on that, there's something you need to do. Run from that person, okay? Because they don't have a clue what that insurance is going to be until they find out what the elevation is of that property. It's all based on that base flood elevation and how the house is built. So if you've got a 15-foot base flood elevation and the property is built at 18 feet, your insurance rate's going to be good, anywhere from $400 to $600 a year, okay? It's not bad at all. But if it's 3 feet, if it's 12 feet, and the base flood elevation is at 15, that's going to be different. And there's no way I could know that and give you any kind of estimate on the price until I look at that elevation certificate. Because that's what it's all based on, or primarily based on. So it's super important. And the house, guys, I'm going to tell you, don't feel bad about asking them to get an elevation certificate, because if it's in a flood zone and it's going to need a new flood policy, it ain't going to sell without it. You know, and I know your buyer is going to want to know what the flood insurance is going to be.
The lender's gonna wanna know.
The lender's going to run its own thing. Yes, ma'am.
For those properties that are mixed, like part of it's an X and part of it's an AE.
Right.
The part of it that's an X, the house sits on. But there's still, the lender still requires, you know, the flood insurance.
Here's
on it.
my advice. Find another lender. I dealt with that yesterday.
So it's not every lender that requires?
No. The house, and it clearly says this. I wish I had brought it. If I had thought you were going to ask that question, I'd have brought it. The zone determination on this property clearly says that the property, some of the property is in a flood zone, but the house is not. And they showed it as X with an asterisk on it, okay? So the house is not in a flood zone. Now, do I advise that client to buy flood insurance and put on a house? Absolutely, because FEMA keeps coming in, the Army Corps of Engineers keeps coming in every so often, and they rezone everything. And you never have a clue what it's going to be later on down the road. But in this instance, it's not in a flood zone. So the insurance on it is based on the X value. Now, some of these mortgage companies, they're not really comfortable with that, okay? That's why a lot of times, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn in this, I encourage people to use lenders that are in this area, that know about this area, that can really defend their clients when they've got an underwriter that's telling them they have to have something when in actuality they really don't, okay? Especially in grandfathering. You'll see some of them who will say, well, you know, we've got to have a new elevation certificate. No, you don't. If it grandfathers, it grandfathers. You don't need a new elevation certificate. You see? So sometimes arguing and fighting with some of these lenders, and we do a lot of it. I mean, I don't know how many of y'all have met Elizabeth or talked to Elizabeth. I just throw her raw meat in her office every time. I mean, truthfully, Elizabeth knows most of these flood laws better than some of the people that she's dealing with. And I've had literally heard her tell them, go look the law up and read it and call me back. And they'll call her back and say, well, you were right. That's imperative that you have people that stay on top of things like this. But yes, if you have, I have another friend of mine, another customer, he's got 5 acres in Columbia, Mississippi, and every year we fight with his mortgage company because part of his 5 acres is in a flood zone, but the house is not. We fight with them every year. and end up having to send them copies of rules and things like this. It's just really huge. So let me get back to the changes. The premium, there are going to be premium increases on people who have pre-firm properties. Because what they're doing is, they're beginning now to move them towards the actuarial price over a period of years. And I want to say it's 5 years. But they're going to begin to move them to the actuarial price. So that's important when you're dealing with a customer that's in an older house, that's in a flood zone, and has a pre-firm property. Yes, that pre-firm flood insurance will grandfather and will transfer. But the reality also is, it's going to keep going up until they get it to where they want it to be. Every bit of flood insurance in 2017 is going to start going up. You'll hear people say anywhere from 5% overall to 9% overall. If it's like, FEMA to me is like my cell phone bill. Y'all know what I'm talking about. When I get my cell phone bill, I look at my cell phone bill and I think, what? How did they get to all this? You see what I'm saying? And when you see sometimes your flood bill or something like that, you do the same thing. So that's why I say the change will be somewhere between 5 and 9%. We just really won't know till we see it. It's not a big deal for people that have preferred risk policies. You're not talking about a lot of increase, like maybe $20 a year. But it is going to go up. Now, one of the things that you're going to see on, how many of y'all have flood insurance policies on your home? Anybody in here? You're going to start getting some mail from FEMA that you're going to look at it and you're going to say, what is all of this? FEMA, in an effort to become more transparent, they're going to start sending you copies of their rating structures and how you get there. It's going to be really, really confusing in my opinion. And what even FEMA says, your phones as an insurance agent is going to start ringing off the hook. Because people are going to get this and they're not going to understand it. So we're going to get a lot of correspondence and a lot of communication from customers with typical stuff, but also FEMA is going to ask things like, well, what zone were you in before? Well, that's significant. Because if you had insurance on your house for 5 years or 10 years, somebody's got to go back somewhere and find out what you were 10 years ago. There's a lot of things that are going to start happening, especially for the insurance agent, that's going to make us extremely busy in order to be able to cover all the changes and all the questions. Won't necessarily affect you a lot, but it will us. At this point, there aren't a lot of carriers that do independent or private flood insurance, but there are some. Let me encourage you on a couple of things with this. First of all, if you're going to give someone the opportunity to get flood insurance from a private carrier, what you need to make sure you're doing is this. They need to understand that if for some reason, at this point, if for some reason that private carrier either chooses not to write or decides to change this policy totally, and you try and go to FEMA, FEMA is not going to grandfather it. At this point, the only policy that NFIP recognizes is theirs. Okay?
You guys need to lobby for that.
Well, the problem is not so much us as it is mortgage companies, because many lenders won't recognize some of these other companies other than NFIP. So it's kind of a catch-22 thing. But there is a bill right now up before Congress that is supposed to correct that. But, you know, let's be honest. Do you think Congress is going to want to lose a lot of these carriers? A lot of these customers to a private carrier? Because they're trying to make up $24 billion. You see? So what's the likelihood that that's really going to pass? I'm not losing a lot of sleep hoping that it's going to. But it would be nice if it would, because competition brings down rates. Yes?
What is a basic flood insurance